Department of State Services says it has unraveled a plot to impose an interim government on Nigeria. The security agency says the plan is meant to promote mass protests, undermine civil rule, and plunge the country into crisis. Arise correspondent Benga Shiru looks at the implications of an interim government as President Buhari continues with plans for a successful transition.
Just like any political transition, there are winners and losers. While the 2023 presidential election ended with Senator Bola Tinubu declared the president-elect, the election has left ripples of disenchantment of allegations of electoral fraud, questioning the sanctity of the ballot. In the days to come, the supporters of the Obedient Movement and the Atiku campaign group have taken to the streets to express their misgivings about the electoral process. The president-elect's move to extend the olive branch did little or nothing to douse the tension. The opposition parties are now at daggers drawn. Not relenting on their demand for justice, the legal fireworks also commenced to seek redress. With the uneasy political atmosphere rising to a fevered pitch, fueling speculations that may put the expected smooth sail of the president-elect to the top seat of power on May 29 under threat. Like the coming to be of a worst nightmare, the latest threat alert from the Department of State Services claims to have uncovered plot to foist an interim government on the nation, once again putting the nation's transition under pressure. If by sheer accident the co-plotters of this interim agenda succeed in their plot, the obvious implications of this arrangement will no doubt set a delicate precedent with a strong reminder of the 1993 interim government set up by the former military dictator, General Ibrahim Babangida. The big question is, what does the interim arrangement portend for the nation's democracy? How would posterity preserve this plot as the nation stands at the threshold of another political transition? Benga Ashiru, Arise News.
Nigeria's Department of State Services says it has uncovered a plot by certain political interests to comment trouble across the land with the intention of creating stumbling blocks ahead of a successful inauguration of President-elect Bola Tinubu on May the 29th, 2023. Arise analyst Dr. Sam Amadi joins us now to discuss this critical allegation as well as its likely implications for national security and democratic governance. It's good to have you on the show, Dr. Amadi. Now, let's go straight into it. Now, what we're looking at, what could be, the intentions of these entrenched interests, and what is the possible implication of this, as well as what should the states be doing to ensure that they maintain peace in the land?
Okay, let's start with what should be done to maintain peace. And the thing that shouldn't be done is to raise the kind of press release that DSS released. I mean, objectively, the Department of State Security is an intelligence agency for the federal government. And when its press statement reads like the press statement of any of the other organizations or political parties, it becomes distasteful. First, you talk about persons who you have uncovered. And by the way, there's nothing that needed to be, dug out. It's on the face of it. Some persons have questioned the legitimacy of the election, the validity of the results, and they have gone to court. Some persons have been in court, been in the streets. Abuja has witnessed for the last 1 week or so a lot of protests, and these protests have been largely peaceful. In fact, we've recorded no incident of any form of violence. A few days ago, we saw the pro-Tinubu march and the anti-Tinubu march happen at the same time. In Washington, there will be a protest where the government has clearly defined, you don't have to trespass over lawns, block road, and give permit. And those the promoters of that protest have signed on to obey the rules. So there's nothing to uncover here. The facts are in the face of all of us. What is important is that the state security should focus on dealing with the real challenges to insecurity, to security of the country. One, allegations, for example, that the Chief Justice of Nigeria met with any person outside the country who are involved in this election should be investigated. Whoever peddled that rumor, published it, if it's not true, are the kind of things you investigate on X, because these are things that are dangerous. If they are true, then you have to investigate why those kind of meetings happen. These are the real security challenges. Allegations, for example, we had the INEC return officer in Abia talk about pressures, money promised to her to make her do the wrong thing. These are the things the DSS never investigates. These are the national security issues. If some Nigerian citizens, wrongly or rightly, maybe even some can say in a silly manner, decide to go to streets peacefully, express their opposition to whatever, as long as there's no violence, as long as they are not in any way threatening lives, as long as they're not invading public institutions, buildings, they have the right to involve in those protests, because that's really part of democracy. We saw in the US as well, elsewhere in the world, when results come out, as long as people respect this constitutional process, which is that those who don't like this result, the declaration by INEC, have to go to court, no other place. When the court decides, every one of us will go back home and comply. Again, there's a constitutional framework for dealing with every of this challenge. Let's assume, what are people talking about interim government? There's nothing like interim government in the sense in which people conceive it, of an external contraption to deal with any possible emergency or any unscripted gap in governance. First, if for any reason the presidential tribunal decides to nullify this election and asks for a rerun, and before that re-election, Mr. President's tenure expires, which must expire on May 29, the constitution is very clear. The Senate President steps in. The President and his Vice President leaves office for reason of a function of time. The Senate President will step in up until June the 3rd or 4th, when the National Assembly is prorogued, and that's a new National Assembly comes in, and the Chief Justice of Nigeria takes charge until election happens. Now, if before then the Supreme Court decides who is the winner, that person takes over. So this talk about interim government is a contraption. There is no such provision in the Constitution. The Constitution knows that it's possible actually, that maybe before May 29, the tribunal makes a decision one way or the other. Say, for example, validate the return, the declaration of return by INEC, in which case, bingo, it goes smooth. The president hands over to the candidate of his party, Ahmed Bola Tinubu, who becomes no longer president-elect, but president. It's also possible, and that's why it's law, that nobody should be frightened of the prospect that the law lords at Court of Appeal, sitting as a presidential tribunal, can nullify the election and say no election within a time frame. Now, if that doesn't happen before May 29, there will be a vacancy. Ahmed Tinubu will not be the president because his election has been nullified. The Constitution provides that the Senate President, who is the next in rank after the President and the Vice President, steps in. And when on June 3rd, he has to go, he can't overstay. He hands over to the Chief Justice of the Federation. We've seen other countries in the world where Chief Justice of the Federation, their Chief Justices, play that holding role until the Supreme Court or an event occurs which creates a validly elected president. So these fears around interim government, and again, the other illogic about interim government from the DSS perspective is that the president is the one who has the responsibility to transfer power to the next president. And so if there's anybody who's plotting interim government in the sense in which DSS puts it, which is a coup against the constitution, then it's like the DSS is accusing the president and the presidency of a plot, because no person will hand over to another person. It is the President Muhammad Buhari who will hand over to the winner of the 2023 election, as long as that election is confirmed or not invalidated by the court. If the court do invalidate it and there's no process to wrap up things, to have authoritative decision on who won the election, or if the court asks for a rerun and there's no time to complete it before May 29, Mr. President will hand over to the still extant acting Senate President. So every of this conception of a plot against democracy actually points unwittingly and of course, ironically, to people who are already part of government, who are also part of the same political party, and there's no chance on earth that that will happen. Now, the other issue that's raised in that DSS distasteful press release is the subtle attack against judicial process. Now, nobody procures injunctions from anybody except to the court. The courts have been issuing injunctions, and the rules for injunctive remedies are very clear to the judges. The cases are both statutorily and case decisions. They have to follow the rules. Now, if the court gives injunction, it's an exercise of a constitutional power. There's no mob that will storm the court and extract injunction from judges. These judges are trained. They may not get it right sometimes, and they do sometimes fail to get it right from a perspective of critics, scholars like us. But they always, whatever they decide, is authoritative. So if a court of legitimate jurisdiction issues an injunction on any issue, that's not a matter of blackmail to talk about insecurity or people who are challenging national security. That's actually a constitutional responsibility. Just as the president, just as INEC has a right to decide who won the election. So INEC has acted constitutionally, although the grounds that they used it might be disputed. And the court is the next place to now reaffirm authoritatively INEC's declaration or rescind it and redeclare. And when the court does that, we accept it. So the judiciary shouldn't be under any blackmail. They have a right to issue any kind of order. And DSS is not a protector of incoming government. It is not also a protector or an offender or aggressor of those who are challenging the government. The DSS is an agency of state responsible for national security.
Okay, Dr.
Not
Sam
particular
Amadi. Sorry, I'm just
protection.
going to interject in there quickly.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for laying that out so extensively. Now, the storyline of an interim government is not new. It's something we heard vastly from various sides of the polity in the lead up to the elections. Now, my question is, you know, as this has been an ongoing discussion, we did see Femi Fani-Kayode being invited by the DSS after making statements alluding to a similar plot. And of course, he then after apologized. Now we have the DSS saying, in fact, you know, we have confirmed that this is the situation. Given the time frame and how protracted this discussion has been going on in the public space, should the DSS still be at talking stages with the public, or should they have gone into a phase where they're implementing action if this is an evidence-based statement?
That's a good question. I think the problem with DSS is that they confuse politics with intelligence. See, like I said, when people talk about interim government, I think they confuse many things. That's what I try to make clear. That is a prospect of a holding president between now and whenever. And that's nothing to be afraid of. It's constitutional. Assuming, like I said, if the court says that the election was invalid and say rerun it, and there's no time, the president has to leave, there must be somebody, and that person is the Senate president and later the Chief Justice. So there's nothing conspiratorial about that prospect. It's real. And DSS has no reason to get frightened by that prospect. It's a due process. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. Two, if there are people who are plotting against the state in the sense that they are thinking around extra constitutional and illegal actions, it's the province of the DSS to arrest and interrogate them. It's not something for press release. And they don't want to borrow talking point from Fani-Kayode or from Kiyamo or from Bayronaga, or people who say, oh, they want to force a fait accompli. That's not DSS job. So the point I'm making is that DSS shouldn't. Oftentimes they get caught up in this political rhetoric where they sound as if they are another department of government or a part of a political organization trying to head off a political storm. That's not their job. The constitution is very clear Nigerians are going to be agitated. They're going to be talking. If you look at the social media, look at so much talking points going on there. The cyber department, the Nigerian police is monitoring everything. They know when there's a hate speech. They know when there are statements that they should investigate. It's not when people express their views. And then the guys on the street, that's the point I'm getting to, are on the street legitimately, because that's the Nigerian constitutional practice. It didn't start today. We've seen people go to the streets. We've seen people complain. That doesn't face the government. At the end of the day, there will be a transition. As long as the court does not invalidate the election, President Buhari will hand over May 29 to the president-elect declared by INEC. But if they do nullify it, then the other safeguards will trigger the Senate President, the Chief Justice of the Federation. There's no harangue about it. So the point I'm making is that the DSS is on a slippery slope. It has to focus on intelligence. And intelligence is, are there people who are plotting among themselves to have the Nigerian government run on any basis apart from what the Constitution provides? Who are these people? How are they plotting about it? Don't issue a statement that of what we know. There are some people on the streets. There are some people who have gone to the defense headquarters. Some people have gone to embassies and challenging the election. That we know. That will continue. It's going to happen in Washington. It's happening on social media. The protocols of this election have gone to court, and they're making very maximalist statements that this election is flawed fundamentally. It's for the court to decide that. So what the DSS should be, and DSS also helps to, if they issue statements that are this nebulous and too broad, then they create a lot of more anxiety on the people. So what is insecurity? What is state offense against the state? Is it agitating? Is it be on the street peacefully? Is it carrying placard? What have we unearthed? It sounds like there was a magic. What I'm saying that these are mundane, everyday things. People are speaking against the election. Some people are speaking in support of election. People are protesting against it. People are protesting in support of it. The courts are going to pick the pieces and make a determination. And the DSS has no statutory power to interpose in that transaction.
Thank you so much for your time and input. I know you're a wealth of wisdom, and we always appreciate your input. So thank you so much for that very, very extensive analysis.